Well, hello everyone, and welcome to these weekly conversations every single Thursday here at Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute at California State University, Fresno. We are honored to have our guest with us today, a true veteran of the Portuguese radio in California, and also a friend. The Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute is having these conversations as a way to commemorate the centennial of Portuguese radio in California. As I mentioned here before, it was on June 10th, which that year was a Thursday. That's the reason we have them. It was in the afternoon. We don't know exactly the time, but that a man from the island of Terceira in the Azores, Portugal, by the name of José Vitorino, according to Dr. Eduardo Meillon Dias from UCLA, who's done the history of the Portuguese in California, as all of us know, that this gentleman by the name of José Vitorino began a program, 10th of June of 1920. Radio stations weren't really up. It was kind of like one of these, what do we call them today, pirate radios. They weren't officially a radio station, although they existed as a radio station. And he began a program called Vasco da Gama, which is, according to all the research from the Dr. Eduardo Meillon Dias, the very first Portuguese radio program in California, and from our research, the very first Portuguese radio program probably anywhere in the world, because radio began in Portugal a few years after that, and also in the Azores many years after that. And then in 1930, a couple, a very famous couple, by the name of Artur Vieira Avila, and his wife Celeste, better known as Rosinha, began the radio program called Castelos Românticos that lasted all the way up until the 1960s. Anyway, we have with us John Cardadeiro. Hello, John. How are you, my friend?
I am fantastic. And yourself?
You are always well. Yes, you're one of the most positive people I know. Let us thank you so much for joining. What's that?
I was going to say, I'm considering the alternative. I got to be positive.
Let us talk a little bit about the Portuguese radio and your experience with Portuguese radio all these years. I must say to everyone that we are on Facebook Live, so welcome. This is also going to be archived on the PBBI's YouTube channel, and of course, as important as that, these conversations will be transcribed and part of the Portuguese Oral History Project that is being archived at the Henry Madden Library at California State University, Fresno, for future generations. So, John, take us back. When you, of course, first of all, if you don't mind, telling us a little bit about your story. I know you came to the United States at the age of 10, precisely the same age I did. So we share that in common. Yeah, precisely. We were 10 years old when we left our land and came to the United States. Tell us a little bit about that journey. What brought your family?
My father immigrated in 1928. And in 1956, we arrived in New York on December 20th, to be exact. Me, my sister, and my mom, my late mom. From there, we came to California. And I'm sure I'm going to sound racist, but I'm not. Believe me, I am not. We came to California in the middle of the night, must have been around 11 o'clock. And now Portugal back in the 50s, and probably even today. I haven't been there for many, many years. Last time was 1970, so you can imagine. But back then, Portugal was pretty much a white country, white people. There was very little else. There was one fellow that was of the African or Negro race, and I was the only one in town. Of course, he had a certain degree of acceptance, like he was novelty, and people loved him. He rode a little bicycle down the road with his groceries. I think he was single. I'm not sure. I was only 8 or 9 at the time, so I don't remember that much. In any case, I was the only one. I came here at 10 o'clock at night, or shortly thereafter, and to the San Francisco International Airport. And my father was there with my uncle, came and pick us up. And we drove over to Oakland, where my father lived, in a house that was owned by a Terceirense. How about that, huh? Manuel Barcelos. Manuel Barcelos was his name, and he played viola.
Hmm.
He only played it once. I don't know if I wasn't playing anything at the time, but he played it once, and I was, my goodness, wow, this is like listening to Mozart in person. But he did play a little bit, and he was the landlord. So we arrived there in the night, and we went to bed immediately because we were pooped. And so the next morning I get up, probably before everybody else. I came out, we lived on the second floor of the house, and looked out the window, and I see nothing but pretos, Negroes, outside in the street. I says, what the heck is this? We only had one in my hometown, which was Ilhévu in the mainland. And I said, look at all these people. I have mixed feelings, to be very frank with you. I watched them, and for the next 5 years, I lived there, made friends and the whole bit. So that was basically the initial. It was a kind of a shock in a way, but nevertheless, we were in America.
Mm-hmm. And so, from coming at the age of 10, I know you got involved in Portuguese radio very young. What made you get involved in Portuguese radio? Did you recall listening to it when you first came over to the Oakland area?
Absolutely.
So what do you recall about listening? Who do you recall listening to?
Oh, I can tell you a whole bunch of them, including the Avalas.
Oh, you were, okay, so that's right, you came in the 50s, so of course you had the Avalas.
They passed away, I believe, one year from the other, 1961 and 62. I always heard Mr. Alvala died of some kind of a complications with his gallbladder. Not true. According to the information that I received since then, that is truthful, he died of a heart attack. That's what he died of. But I guess it was not cool to say that at the time. I'm not sure. There was a lot of things that were taboo, and today, no big deal. Anyway, so one day we were, his wife, Rosinha, by the way, Rosinha, you know where that name came from?
No. I don't think the community knows as well. We just, I've always read from all the research I've done that he was, Celeste, and I have his books, but there's no explanation on it.
All right, well, I'll tell you. And the only reason I know, is my brother-in-law, married to my sister, was his godson.
Oh.
Was Artur Avila's godson. And he says, one day I asked him, says, what's this about Rosinha? Oh, that was a love thing. He called her my Rosinha, my rose. And it stuck. It stuck, and to the very end of the program, that was Rosinha. Now, towards the end of the 50s, the only time that Mr. Avila showed up on the radio was towards the very end, before he left. Of course, he passed away, and she then took over, but then she didn't want to do it by herself. There was something missing there, and I totally understand. But she did leave, and he did leave, obviously, and she finished up the program. My wife is walking in here with something in her hand that is talking to me, and I don't know what it's trying to tell me, but I'm going to back off because I'm busy with a good friend of mine. Anyway, so that's the story behind the Rosinha.
And so you listen to these people, to these pioneers, basically, because he was the second person to start a Portuguese radio program in California.
Diário.
Yeah, and the first diário. Yes, the very first daily. That's right. Yeah. Yes, he was the first daily. We don't have much on Mr. Zé Vitorino's first adventure with Vasco da Gama. From all the research that Dr. Dias said, all we know is it lasted a few years, but we don't know exactly how many. And it was weekly. Mr. Zé Vitorino was from the island of Terceira, and I heard an interview that Euclides Alves, who both of us know well. Euclides did an interview in his first years of radio, so this has been about 43 years ago, with a gentleman by the name of Mr. Frank Mendonça, which was also a pioneer, who had a program in
Yes.
Merced called Frankly Speaking, which I love the name.
I love it.
Yeah,
Yes,
and it was a
yes,
7-day-a-week program. Actually, he
yes.
criticized in the interview Diavolas because he said, "Oh, Diavolas said that they had the first daily, but they were Monday through Friday. Mine was every day, 7 days a
See, I
week."
didn't know that. I
Yeah,
didn't know that.
typically
Now there was
radio,
there's
typically
were
radio
6 days.
personalities.
Now there were 6 days. I remember because I heard him Monday
And
through Saturday.
Monday through Saturday, and he was 7 days. So,
Well,
but
you got to
but
beat by a
Mr.
day.
But Mr. Mendoza's interview, and thanks to Gleach, we have now that audio, which is it shed some light on this José Vitorino. He said that he started the program. He remembered, and he was illiterate. He couldn't read or write, which was interesting. He
There
could
was
not.
someone else. There was someone else that was also, I am told, I don't know this for a fact, but I am told he was also illiterate. I cannot mention his name. He's still around. And he did a very good program. For a person that was illiterate, my goodness, he spoke well. Had a beautiful
Well,
radio
interesting.
voice.
Well, according to Frank Mendonça, Mr. Frank Mendonça, José Vitorino was illiterate, and then he started later on another program with the gentleman in Visalia, and this program he would travel from Modesto to Visalia, and that to me is just unbelievable in 1930s traveling that far,
How
but
did
he
get
did.
there? What
Yeah,
kind of a car did he have?
I don't know what kind of
You
car he
don't
had to
know,
get.
man. These are important facts.
Yeah, those are fascinating things that I'd like to discover, and hopefully
Yeah.
we can, maybe through some families. We're trying to dig
Yeah,
right
through
now.
the family. Yeah, through the
Yeah,
family.
we're trying to dig
Oh,
into finding. There's a gentleman interested that's helping me out as well to see if we can get the baptismal records and to see what year Mr. Vitorino came over and find out a little bit more about it. But anyway, we listening to these folks, what led you to start, and what you recall? What was your very first radio?
my recollection dates back to Portugal, to the city, now city, back then was a village, Ilhavo, which is next door to Aveiro, in Beira Litoral in Portugal. Anyway, so I always loved music. I mean, anybody that knows me knows that. But I didn't play an instrument until I was about 17 or 18. Because everybody played an instrument. Here I as the dummy, I don't play anything. And I felt self-conscious about the whole thing. But anyway, back then, I began to listen to emissora. There was a couple of stations up north in Porto, the city of Porto. And they had programs throughout the day, everything in Portuguese, but the music, which really teed me off. What do you got there? That's my wife. She, like there's nothing going on, right in and just bring your tool with you. Anyway, so Emissoras do Norte Reunidos. That was the name of the outfit that owned the 5 or 6 different types of programs they had throughout the day and night. And in any case, they had everything. The radio broadcasters were all spoke Portuguese, the music not so much. So at the end of each, they have like 4 or 5 people throughout the day. And I knew the hours they began. And the first thing that I did, listen, is, so what are they going to play? Broadcast during their 3-hour segment. And they would say, okay, from such a time to such a time, normally about 15 minutes, which was ridiculous. Música portuguesa. Wow. I came to America, seriously, this is absolutely the gospel truth. Came here. I got another picture here. I don't know
Yes,
why.
we do. We have our dean on the line listening to us. But continue. That's fine.
Who is that?
The dean of the College of Arts and Humanities.
Oh, the dean. Oh,
the dean. Yes.
I got to put my tie.
No, don't worry.
Don't worry.
I was just checking in to see how you're doing. I'm racing around.
Oh, don't race around. You'll get there eventually. And without being like that.
No, this is great.
Oh,
Thank you for joining us, Dean Chapman.
Oh,
absolutely.
you're so welcome.
And she's
We're-
beautiful from what I see on the
John
picture.
Cardadeiro, yes, she's a beautiful dean. We have John Cardadeiro was telling us how he got involved in Portuguese radio. He remembers Portuguese radio from the 1950s, and that's amazing.
Wow.
Considering that I'm old now, yeah. Most of the mind is shot. But anyway, yes. What was I saying? Anyway, see what I mean?
When you were talking about how we went when you were listening to the Portuguese radio in Portugal that only played 15 minutes of Portuguese
That's
music.
right. So I came to America. I came to California to listen to Portuguese music because of the programming at the time, and even today to a certain extent, was all independent. They had independent producers and directors and everything else.
Explain that to us. What is an independent?
An independent is somebody that doesn't work for a radio station in this case.
Right. So they buy the time and they broker it.
He bought the time, yes. He would go, well, it depends on the station. Some stations would provide the commercials, and the announcers, would then get a percentage of it. But you were also responsible to make sure that if the station didn't get enough commercials, comes out of your pocket. Something like today.
So there was kind of a minimum that you had to do. Yes.
Absolutely, minimum. Yeah. And one of them was let me go backtrack there. So I came to America to listen to Portuguese music. Yes, that is true. The programs at the time when I came here in the San Francisco Bay Area were Diabla, Castelos Românticos, that was the name, the Castles of Romance that was the name of the program in English. But they also broadcast all in Portuguese. And then we have Tomás Dias. Now I met him. He was a chubby dude.
Tomás Dias, I'm not aware. Who was he?
Well, I can't give you very much, but I know he had a problem with his eyesight. He had very thick glasses. And he used to come daily, Monday through Friday. Well, daily is Monday through Friday in most cases. Right. Worked out of Warner Brothers Radio in Oakland, which was then KWBR. At 1310 on the radio. Anyway, so
this was the late 50s.
This is, yeah. Well, he began in the 40s, but okay. I wasn't here, so
sure. But when you were listening to it, we're talking about the late 50s.
Yeah, from 56 on, and of course, woke me up every day. My parents would turn it on before my father went to work, and I was fast asleep, and that tipped me off because it woke me up. But after a while, I became accustomed, like everybody else. When your body gets accustomed to a certain routine, you can't go away from it. You're there. Anyway, so he played 2 songs. His program was 45 minutes long. 2 songs. That's it. You could count on that. One at the very beginning and one to say goodbye. And what basically was a program of news, a lot of news in the middle. I remember him talking about I Love Lucy and some of the problems they were having at the time, which I could not relate, and I couldn't even begin to tell you about it. Now I know. He mentioned one time the word marijuana.
Wow, in the 1950s.
Marijuana, in the 50s. Yeah. I never forgot that. I said, what the heck's marijuana? And all I could remember was a song from Brazil with that name. I don't know the artist is. Maria Joana, pra onde você vai? Something like that.
I remember that.
Had you heard of hemp? Because didn't they call it hemp way back when?
Heck no, this is long before your time. What are you talking about?
No,
you're a young lady. Here we go.
And so he basically had a news show. So he would take. What is your feeling? I mean, he would take news items from the United States and basically give them in Portuguese.
To be frank with you, I don't know, because the stations did have a teletype machine from the Associated Press or United Press International at the time. Right. I don't know if he did that or if he took it from the paper. Man, the guy started at 6:15 in the morning.
Sure.
So, to translate, it takes you a while.
Sure.
I would think, because I did it afterwards, and I know how long it took me.
Sure. To
make sense to the Portuguese. It's not a question of translation. It's a question to make sure they understand what you're talking about.
Correct. Yeah.
Like the marijuana thing, I have no idea.
Right. To bring it to the language level of your listeners. Yes.
Absolutely. Which is the other side of the translation itself.
So you were raised with the Portuguese radio programs. When did you take the plunge?
I did it in the first time I was before a microphone, not with anybody, just myself and I, and Diapolis was on their program.
Ah.
There was an interview type like we're doing right now, except it was live. Everybody was together like in a round table.
Mm-hmm.
And we began to talk, and they asked me basically the same thing. There was three of us. There was myself. There was a young lady that since has passed away. She was beautiful. I was really sad. I mean, Rosa Maria Plikas. I don't know if you remember the name.
I know the Plikas family. I know the Plikas family.
Yes, she was the daughter of, the mother, Arminda, was very into the Federação Fraternal Luso-Americana all her life. Anyway, that was her daughter. And the other one was my sister. My sister came here with 3 years old. I put her on the radio. Speak Portuguese. Go ahead. I dare you.
I'm sure she spoke well. Yeah, I'm sure she spoke.
I tried. I don't speak well, but that's fine. Anyway, so we were there, and Rosinha was the interviewer, and asked the others basically the same questions. And that was my first step into the radio business, although I used to make a radio fictitiously at home, playing records that were made of paper, and I was just being creative about the whole thing. But I got into radio. I always loved it. I always liked the idea of broadcasting. I don't know why. None of my family is a musician or a broadcaster, but I did. It was something in me from way back when, I'm sure. One of these days, I'm going to call some of those outfits that trace your lineage. And
there you go. There you go. To see if you.
I'm almost afraid.
Broadcasters in your past. But so, how old were you when you started your program? Did you begin one yourself, or was it with somebody else?
No. I began with Mr. Gilberto Lopes de Aguiar. He was at the time the publisher of Voice of Portugal, the Jornal Voz de Portugal. And the extension of the newspaper was a radio program he had on Saturday mornings. And somebody told him about me. I don't know who it was, nor do I care, it doesn't matter. He called me up and, can you come in? His program was on Saturday mornings. Can you Saturday and talk to us? And let's just do a program together. I have no idea, but I knew what his program format was. So I had a decent idea. So I did go. And some people listened, obviously. And I got all kinds of, that kind of thing. I guess they liked our, talking to each other. And I became a regular. So that's how I began, become a regular colaborador of Voice of Portugal.
Okay. And the program was on Saturday mornings, you said?
8 to 9, absolutely. At a little studio where he also had all of the equipment to print a newspaper. Everything was there. You didn't have to sit anywhere. And I didn't appreciate that to that extent what he was telling me. Now that I look back, the man had everything. He also published a little excerpt, or insert, I should say, called Companheiro da Alegria.
Yes, I remember.
Remember that?
I remember from my research of Portuguese press how it's been archived actually at the UPC. Yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful. When I was at the UPC not too long ago, I was looking for some of the, because I'm always interested in the things of the past. I love it, especially now we're in California. What did our ancestors do? How do they live? All kinds of stuff. And I found very little, but I didn't spend that much time either. And there's
not a lot, but the Voice of Portugal, Voz de Portugal, is archived also in Massachusetts. So from there, did you spin off on your own?
Pretty much. There was a lull, there was a break, and then I began with the fellow from Fayal. His name is Manuel Vargas Pereira. Ever heard of him?
Yes.
He is now in the East Coast. I believe he's in Boston. He does a TV/radio program out there.
Yes.
But he's a religious man. He got into religion. That's what he's doing. That's fantastic. Yeah. I haven't spoken with him for many years now.
So you and him set up a kind of a partnership?
No, it's not even a partnership. Senor Borges, anybody in the radio at any time, except maybe 2 or 3. And those were very, very, in capital letters, lucky. Esteves, Carlos Goulart come to mind. as making money and living off the radio. And I understand that Ned Clementino from the program you had recently also did the same thing. Those were everybody else does it for love. This is a love thing. It's if you enjoy something that you're doing, that's your payment.
Right, right. But let's talk about a little bit about those two people that you mentioned. So because you had a radio, you collaborated, and you had your own radio program. But of course, being raised Portuguese American anywhere in California is in the 1960s and 70s and even into the 80s, but especially 60s and 70s, Portuguese radio was a staple. And I wanted to ask you a couple of questions in that perspective. First of all, I'm of the belief that the community that we are today kind of owes itself to Portuguese radio. Everything from Portuguese language programs at high schools through university, everything from these cultural organizations that popped up in the 1960s and 70s, the bands, the folklore groups, the cultural groups, from the athletic to the Família Portuguesa that no longer existed, but existed for many years in San Leandro, to the ones in the Valley and even in Southern California. The radio kind of brought people together. What is your feeling on that? What is your feeling of these people like Esteves and like Costa and like Agnello Clementino, who were kind of towering figures in the Portuguese community?
Absolutely. They were considered to be the biggest actors in Hollywood in terms of acceptance. My goodness, yes, they were. There was literally, and very few people could afford a television set back then. Not very many. And when the color came out, I asked my father, because that was given to us, not as a loaner, but as a gift. Popped out, just stopped playing. Says, okay, let's go get a TV. Because by now, I don't want to get off the topic here, but before that, when we received our TV, it took him about a couple of years before he began to watch some of the Westerns of the time, and then he fell in love. He wanted more of it. Tell me, what's that in English? When it conked out.
What's that?
When our original TV conked out, I asked them, let's go find another one, because by now he was hooked in some of those Westerns and so forth. So we went to the store, and they were just now beginning to bring out the color TV. And I remember, I don't know, it was a Zenith. That was his favorite brand. And I saw the price tag. And I don't remember. I knew nothing about credit cards. I don't think they existed back then. This is like the early 60s. And I says, oh, what? Are you kidding me? I think it was $300 some odd dollars. I forgot what it was for that. But that is color. Try to expect. Didn't buy a TV that night. Nothing happened.
So these people like Agnello Clementino and Esteves and everything were kind of heroes, as you said. I mean, people looked up to them.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. They could say no wrong. I mean, they were idols in many ways. Yes, they were. I mean, what else can I say about them? I enjoy their programs, but they got monotonous after a while because they didn't offer anything really new or interesting. They kept on blah, 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 dedicating songs to this and that lasted 15 minutes. Well, if they have a program of an hour, how many songs can you play? And that's what the younger crowd was interested in. That's what bands came in shortly thereafter. Prior to that, we had Pascuas. We had Orquestra Pascua.
And that's when, okay, so if we take these pioneers, as you said, and they were not very much on, it was the same thing here in the Valley, the Santos family, Pisca, as they were known. They had a program, for example, for an hour, but they would play maybe one or two songs. There was a lot of talk and a lot of course, advertising jobs and, and where people could buy stuff. But then the younger generation, such as yourself then at the time, the younger generation came in. How did you guys look at changing radio from these at the time old timers? Let's put it that way. From these icons.
Yes, I wanted to do something different. I wanted to do. By the way, I took radio courses here in at Laney College in Oakland and also at San Jose State in San Diego State. When I was in the Navy, I was in the Navy here during the Vietnam War, which I thoroughly enjoyed. A live performance.
Yes, I'm sure. And so
I wanted to change.
You took some professional courses.
Yeah, I took professional courses, yes. The first thing that I did, made an effort to do it, was play more music. That was the first, flat out, and people began to, hey, check him out. He's playing music. I mean, wow. Whatever's coming out, I have a humongous collection of music from the 1900s.
John, how did you get records at the time? That couldn't be the easiest thing in the world to do.
Well, I've been collecting since I was a kid.
Okay.
But these particular recordings, and I could shoot myself in both feet, because Mr. Aguiar, Gilberto Aguiar, somebody gave him some Edison originals. I had no idea if they were good or bad, but they were full of dust because he had them along with the equipment that he used to print the paper. So I said, hey, take all if you want to. I said, come on, are you kidding me? They look like hell. But I didn't want to insult the man, so I brought 2 or 3 of them, and they're still there. In fact, one of them, Mr. Avila, put on the paper not too long ago, the cover. There was only one side, actually. The other side was black, and the hole in the middle.
So there was a place. So there was a place to buy records here in California.
What are you talking about? Those old ones?
No, I'm talking about the 1960s.
Oh,
when
yes.
There was a place to buy records here already.
Absolutely. Besides the ones in San Jose. Sherman Clay was one of them. Okay. Sears, Macy's.
But Portuguese records?
Portuguese records. I got them right there.
Really?
I can show them to you.
Okay. At Macy's. At Macy's.
At Macy's, yes.
That's wild.
That is. I didn't know that, but I'm glad you said so. Because those, they were recorded originally in Portugal under Portuguese brands, like Columbia, RCA, and so forth. They had their own brands out there. And then they would sell the rights to American companies. And in this case, they ended up in some of these stores. There was a place in New York that was owned by a couple called Monitor Records. Maybe you heard of them. They took a lot of, no, you have not? Look under Monitor, just like it sounds. They had a lot of recordings that came from Portugal, or the original recordings were made there, but they got, obviously, the copies or the recordings of that, and they published their own LPs. The big names were in those records coming out of New York, much cheaper.
Right.
$3.99 or $3.98 per LP.
For an LP. Yeah, but $3.98 in the 60s was a little bit of money.
That's true. Yeah. But I was delivering papers, you see, so therefore I had money.
Sure. So you had built a collection because when you went to do a radio program in the 1960s or even the 70s, and you were brokering this time from a radio station, they didn't furnish you records. You had to take your own, correct?
One station did that. One station did that. That was in Manteca. Okay. Mr. Jack McFadden was also the manager for Buck Owens and the Buckaroos, of course. He gave me, as I walked in, he invited me to do a show. That was a 7-day-a-week situation. So I said, I can't do that. I work. So he said, well, you can record it. So on Sundays, myself and my wife would go to the station, do my live program, which is at night, 8 to 10 at night. Then I would sit there half of the night to record the next 7 hours or the 6 hours, whatever was left of the week. My program came at 5 in the morning. I used to listen to it at work.
This was in Manteca, and you lived where?
I'm sorry? I lived at the time, let me remember. I was still single, Oakland.
So you drove to Manteca to do this show?
That's the work of love I was referring to a little
Yeah,
while
yeah.
ago.
So, and this show you said was done on a local station in Manteca. And what years were these, John? You recall the years more or less?
Yeah, 1978 through about 1981 or so. The station then changed formats, and the foreign language types were gone. There was a fellow that followed the Spanish, the same thing. So, yeah.
But prior to 78, you were doing radio already, obviously.
Oh, yes, since 19, I'm trying to remember the years. I don't want to go wrong, or not too much wrong. It was 1968. 1968.
This was the program that you started with another person.
No, this is by the other person was already in the background. No,
Oh,
this
it's
is
before
mine.
68.
This is Portugal. That was the name of it, or Aqui é Portugal.
And you started that one yourself
Yes.
in
Yeah,
1968, more or less.
It's in 68, around September-ish.
And in what station? What was that at?
That was a KEGL at 1480 in Santa Clara, in the Franklin Mall Shopping Center.
Okay. And that was a weekly program.
Yes, was on Sundays. Steve's broadcast from there when he was let go by his original station, KAZA in Gilroy. So he went there and asked me to to announce the fact that he was coming the following week or 2 weeks from then. And I did, of course. I liked everybody, and I still do. That's just my nature, unfortunately.
And so your program was once a week. Was that station, other than Steve's, were there other Portuguese programs? Or was
Not
it
at
pretty
that
much,
station, no.
not at that station? Okay.
Yeah. And that was the first, that's when I began finally on my own with my own ideas and everything else that encompasses the program. That was the station.
So what did you try to do in your own mind? If you can, let's go back to 1968. You were very young.
Entertain the people.
Okay. So, but what did you
Nothing
try
else.
to do? What did you try to do different than some of the other people were doing to entertain the people?
I spoke as little as I could. Only the things that I felt were important to me must be important to them. Because I was Portuguese, they're Portuguese, and these are things that interest me. I'm not an individual that tries to believe what everybody's thinking or likes or dislikes or what. But I gathered quite a bit of it from going to social events, and people recognized me and sometimes said stuff and sometimes gave me ideas. I don't know. I just want to make sure what came on the air, verbally speaking, was of entertainment value. As far as the music, nothing went on the air unless I heard it first at home. Nothing. And if I
You had your show pre-planned, in other words.
absolutely, even now,
Okay.
even now.
So you don't just take a box of records and say,
Press buttons.
well, I might play one or two. You've got pretty much planned what you're going to do for the whole hour or 2 hours.
Oh yeah, I knew exactly what I was going to do, or 99% of it. Yes, absolutely. How can you do a program without planning for it? Really?
Well, that's why I'm asking you.
There's the answer.
The other thing is, let me ask you a little bit of a $64,000 question. When it comes to now, you're from mainland Portugal,
Right.
and the community in the Bay Area, although there's some people from Ilhavo and other areas, but it is a very Azorean community. How do you feel?
Everywhere.
How do you feel?
Everywhere.
Everywhere, that's true. But how do you feel, and a lot of your colleagues at the time in the 1960s and early 70s were Azorean. How did they receive you?
You're asking me a question. I know the answer is, but it didn't apply to me. You know why? Because I made friends.
Okay.
And they reciprocated. And I would say over 90, probably 100% now are Azoreans. And my goodness, what can I say? I have nothing but beautiful things to say. I remember one time I was getting off the program. I used to broadcast here in Fremont, KFMR. And somebody called the station and wanted to meet me and invite me to a party that they were having at their home. She's not going to be able to understand this, but you will. And so I walked in, and there was some people sitting on the side, and says, "Oh, I'm sorry, I got to say it in Portuguese, otherwise it won't make any sense."
Sure, sure.
Aí o senhor aqui é o senhor Cardadeiro. O senhor é do continente, não é? Eu disse, sou. Por quê? Porque é a pergunta. Eu não sei, é qualquer coisa que o senhor, da maneira que o senhor se expressa. Eu disse, espera aí, mas por que é que ela me está a perguntar o facto de eu ser do continente enquanto ela é dos Açores? Aí eu notei, não, aqui há uma divisão qualquer que eu não sei. Mais tarde, eu perguntei a alguém, outra pessoa amiga, foi qualquer coisa que se passou nos Açores há muitos anos atrás, que os meninos do continente deram cabo das meninas da terceira, ou lá o que é que foi. E disse à minha senhora, isso pode ser a verdade, eu não digo que não seja, mas simplesmente é isto, olha, o português continental é um homem, ou um macho, e a mesma coisa nos Açores. E, entretanto, já havia, infelizmente, a guerra colonial, eles foram para Angola, para Moçambique, para a Guiné, onde eles foram. A senhora não me venha dizer agora que eles foram santos. E ela aí calou a boquinha. Anyway, back in English.
So you didn't feel, there is a plus to being from mainland Portugal when it comes to radio. And for example, here in Tulare County, Kings County, Fresno County, in the Central Valley, one of the radio icons who started this program in the 1930s was Inácio dos Santos, who was from mainland Portugal, from Santarém area, I believe. And people just loved him because he spoke Portuguese. I recall, the elder generation telling me, "Oh, he speaks like no one else can speak," because and so you had that upper hand of having a little bit better. First of all, the pronunciation is different, although you came at 10, but the pronunciation was different. So did people treat you? I'm not asking you if they treated you differently in the negative aspect, but did they treat you in the positive aspect? Oh, he does better because he's from continent.
Neither.
Did you feel that at all?
Neither. It was just like we known each other all of our lives.
And how important was that? Exactly what you said. How important was that relationship? That's something that the people we've talked to in the past have told me that doesn't exist as much today. How important was that relationship between the radio personality, John Cardadeiro, and the listening audience in general? Kind of have you frozen, John.
Well,
here you go.
Well, I don't think there's tremendously in still picture. Oh, here you are. Now
you're better now. Yeah, you had a little bit of a frozen thing. We're okay now. We're okay.
No, I don't think there was any animosity on anybody's part. I didn't even know that it existed, to be very, very frank with you.
Okay, but do you feel that the radio programs in the 1960s, 70s, and right up to the 80s, when we had a lot of the so-called independent radio programs, which are less and less today, but in the and they were in their heyday, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, they were in their heyday, especially in the 1960s, 70s, and maybe mid-80s, all the way up.
I'd say the 60s in first place. Not so much in the 70s.
Okay. But there were still quite a few independents in the 70s.
Everybody was independent.
Okay. Do you feel that they had a different connection with the radio audiences than the so-called professional radio people now that do 5, 6, 7, 8 hours a day of radio? What is your feeling on that?
You can't do. I did that 7, 8 hours you're talking about. Right. I worked for Batista Vieira when he was still in Morgan Hill. Mm-hmm. The station had just began operating, and he had me on Sundays.
KSQQ?
No. Yeah, KSQQ, absolutely.
When it first began, okay.
That's right. And he had me on Sundays from 2 until 10, 2 in the afternoon until 10 o'clock at night. Now, at the beginning, when I've been first 3 hours or so, I'm fine. I'm all gung-ho, oh yeah. After that, I began to think of ways not to say so much. So I brought these programs that were either dramas, dramatic shows like the old novellas they had or in the 30s and 40s here in America, and comedies and stuff that I have been archiving for many, many decades, and took care of about a half an hour or more of the program. That helped me tremendously to shut up, so to speak, and just relax and listen to it. I don't think you can do otherwise. Maybe you can. I don't know. But that's a lot of hours, man.
Sure,
that's a lot of hours.
Sure. And one of the things I'd like to have you reflect on, both as someone who did radio and someone who listened to these iconic figures of the, especially as you say, the 1960s and even 70s, especially the 60s, the Esteves, the Nel Clementino, the Costas, etc., and then other names down here in the Valley and in Southern California as well. Now, a lot of them, and it's no secret, it's just they did not get along with each other. Do you think that that was more of a show, or do you think it was genuine? Because it did build their audience.
Yes, that's, of course. It's like professional wrestling.
Right.
No, let me tell you a story. And this story comes from a fellow that I worked with for a number of years, Fernando Azevedo. Fernando Azevedo had a program called Voice of Portugal initially. And then he went to Portugal for a number of years, came back. And of course, meanwhile, the newspaper came into view by Gilberto Aguiar, and the name was Voice of Portugal. He couldn't go back to his old name. So he called them Ecos de Portugal, Echoes of Portugal. Okay, he was telling me some of the stories about what happened before I came to this country. Avalas, where Leonel Azevedo in Santa Clara was another, Arturo Avila, and some, I don't know what, he mentioned a whole bunch of them. And you know, these days, I don't think anybody show up. What they had, and they made a big promotion out of it, they decided to have a show. And they would choose a topic that they couldn't get along with or criticize each other over. This is all over the air. You got it now. So come and defend yourself. And that was the kind of the theory behind it. They went to the auditoriums. The Oakland auditorium comes to mind. They would big table out there, and one sit on one side and the other sit on the other side, and they began. The place was jam-packed with people, just for that. There was no entertainment value.
A debate between them.
And this happened a number of times. This was not a one trick pony. It happened a whole bunch of times. And that's, so they were more united in that respect. Were they as united as they were afterwards? But the only way to judge that is by the acceptance by Joaquim Esteves. He promoted social events of his own, like this picnic, this winter festival, and that kind of thing. And of course, he was the king. He was it. There was nobody else even close. Well, Carlos Goulart was close. And another fellow that came in like a fluke, and he had about 5 or 6 social events, all jam-packed with people. He lives in the Valley. And the last time I heard, he was living in Denair. Humberto Cunha. You know him? Mm-hmm. He's a good man. He's a good guy.
I've heard of him.
His program was nothing but commercials, dedications, and music, of course. But he kept it at a minimum. Somewhere, and he was living in San Jose at the time. And a lot of people began to, hey, he's a good guy. And this festas at IES Hall were jam-packed with people.
Let's talk a little bit about that. So some of the folks, especially in today's world, some of the people who, didn't live the 60s and the 70s of the Portuguese radio programs here. The social calendar of the Portuguese American community was much different than what it is today. And so the radio programs, and whether it be with their festas, their picnics, all the events that you've mentioned, they were the social calendar of the Portuguese American community mainly.
Absolutely. There was nothing else. Where were the Portuguese, especially those that have problems with the English language? Where
Right.
would they go? That was it. If they walked to it, in fact, in our case, when we came here, there was a hall in North Oakland called Flor de Ciudad. And it was about 6 or 7 blocks from our house. We walked there. My father had no car, so we walked there. But those were the exceptions, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what they did. And the problem became afterwards because it became monotonous. It was the same festas, regardless somebody else was involved, true. But the festas, the contents were very similar. Oh, people are walking. You think this is New York? What do you call it in New York? The Grand Central Station.
Yes. You're popular guys, John.
Popular, yeah. So that was yeah. I think the festas, and the problem was that eventually they became oh, they're making money. The Portuguese.
Mm-hmm.
I want one better than yours. The same old. They keep repeating. Sometimes they have 2 and 3 festas within a radius of a few blocks. Look at San Jose even today. Look at that East Santa Clara, and what's the name of the other one? 27th, I think North 27th, somewhere around there. They have Benfica, they have Sporting, they have Banda Bella, and they have, what's the other one? Nova Aliança. This is all within a block and a half of each other. And then they wonder why there is no people or not enough people.
So let me ask you a question. When we, what Portuguese radio has changed, okay, and as we're celebrating and the Centennial, a couple of things. First of all, how do you see this transition from the independence to the, for lack of a better word, professionalized, or the full-time, whether one is a professional or not, but people who make a living basically, or who work, full-time or part-time for Portuguese radio, entrepreneurs who have radio stations. There's a couple of them, as we know, the Batista Vieira family. This transition that began in the 70s and went into the 80s and 90s, this transition, what in your mind, John, what were some of the pros and cons of this, of losing the independence and going to more of a contracted person?
Well, first of all, the only time the professionals came along was José João, the late José João. We had Álvaro Aguiar, and I think that was it. Was there anybody else? I can't remember anybody else. And I'm not putting anybody there. They spoke beautiful. They spoke perfect Portuguese, which we unfortunately never had prior to that. In fact, myself and I loved the independence. Everybody had their own group of people following them. They had their ideas. They have their choices of music. They had, I don't know. It's just their way. They were unique in their ways. But some of them, they should have stayed home. Spoke absolutely terrible Portuguese, but yet I like to listen to that. What a bunch of BS he's talking about, but it was good. Mm-hmm. It was entertaining. See, this is what I'm saying about entertaining the people. This is about those fights at the auditorium. But that's Portuguese for you. Mm-hmm. In many cases, that's what I enjoyed the independence. I did. And everyone had a festa. Everyone had a social gathering of sorts, from dances to picnics, you name it. They had them, and they had them a whole bunch of times throughout the year. However, sometimes they, wait a minute, that's my festa day. What are you doing with that? How come you're choosing the same date that I have?
And you think that was on purpose, or that was just to kind of have these different clubs at each other's throats?
I don't think it was that. I think it was just I didn't care. If they were doing that and they knew that somebody else had something on, they didn't care. They just go ahead and do it.
Do you? I'm of the belief that and let me actually.
Because I was a victim of that.
What's that? Who?
because I was a victim of that,
Oh, I see. I see.
that behavior. I'm sorry, go ahead.
How were you a victim of it?
Well, but there were another program. I had 3 social events throughout the year, period. That was it. Same set dates, not the day itself, but the day of the week. And there was another program. In fact, the announcer, the broadcaster already passed away. In any case, every time, at least one time during the year, they would coincide with my festa, with my thing. And they knew that I was not making any money. And they knew that I was in it for the joy of doing radio and providing entertainment because my festa were in good shape as far as getting audience participation. The whole bit, they were in pretty good shape. Maybe, I don't know, maybe it was this, to feel, I don't know.
Sure.
Yeah, but it didn't happen to me.
Do you think that had we not had Portuguese radio and in abundance, which we did in the 1960s and 70s, what I mean in abundance is these different voices, as you mentioned.
Yes.
Do you think that the community would still speak as much Portuguese as we do today? And it's not enough. Obviously, those in languages would like to be had more and more. But do you think if there were no Portuguese radio programs in California like we had because of the immigration, the exodus of the 1950s and 60s and 70s here, do you think that we still would speak as much Portuguese as we do today?
Far from it. As bad as we have some announcers sacrificing the Portuguese language, even so, I don't think so. I think there would be a lack. At least the vocabulary would be substantially reduced. But no, I think, no. I thank God. Thank God is a matter of speaking, because they came here under dire circumstances, many of them. But thank God they came. There was in the late 60s especially, I remember very well being in dance bands and the whole bit. I remember, I saw people. I used to live, of course, the festas, the social events of those years, which is not happening almost to nothing today, were young people. And the thing that happened as far as conversing and staying together and make sure that you go over there next week and so forth, what they were interested basically was dance. Where's the next dance? And being in a group, I used to tell them, yeah, we're going to play over there next week or somewhere, whatever. And they would all show up. It was almost like a guaranteed assistance. Assistance meaning people coming in. Assistencia.
Right. And let me transition from the radio to your music real quick. So you mentioned the Portuguese groups, which is something, or the Portuguese musical groups, which were in abundance, considering the community in California in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. But they're not in abundance today. They practically are non-existent.
No.
So when did you begin being part of that musical scene?
I left the Navy in active service. I left in 1967. And as soon as I got home in Oakland, this fellow, Américo Carlos, he used to be a member of the Pascoe Brothers Orchestra. He was already out of that orchestra. And by the way, they began in 41. Called me. Hey, I want you to play for my band. I said, well, thank you. I didn't know I was home. And he explained, but that's beside the point. I said, sure, of course. At the time, I had been learning how to play guitar in the Navy and prior to going into active service. Nothing to shout about, but I do a little bit. And so, okay, so do we have practice? You can come over to my house and we'll go through some songs and so forth. And we did. I did the best that I could. I didn't know what I was doing. But the one thing that he did say to me was this: you got to hear. And the second thing was, you're not going to be playing guitar. What? What am I going to be playing? I don't know anything else. You're going to play the bass guitar. I says, that's wonderful, except I'm not accustomed playing bass. And he gave me a week to learn. One
So
week to learn.
from then on, you've been in groups.
I'm sorry, from that on, never stopped. Never stopped. Our first gig was in Newman.
Okay.
I was
And
out there. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
What was the name of the group?
Orquestra Lisboa.
I remember.
You remember that?
I do.
You're not that old. Don't give me that.
So this was this had to be what, 68, 69?
Yes, I think before that, 67.
I remember in 68 when we got here. I remember Orchestra Lisboa.
One of the hardest things, speaking of bands and so forth, was that, okay, thank you very much for the job. I'll play as best as I can, but remember, I'm not a bass player. I'm going to learn a little every way, as we go along. Meanwhile, the Ibéricos, remember them? Conjunto Ibérico, Henrique Cardadeiro, is in the Azores now permanently. I don't know if it was Bill Silva or somebody else. Oh, no, I know what happened. See, this is what happens when you're turning 50. I don't mean to scare anybody. I was at Madeirense, the Portuguese hall in Oakland. That was the place to be if you were in a band. It's like Carnegie Hall. Got to go over there. Once you make it there, you make it anywhere. All right, so I went. I was out there, but not to play or far from it. And there's a whole bunch of my friends towards the end of the hall, as usual, looking for a date, looking for anything. Somewhere along, I don't know, after the first hour, somebody from the stage came. I guess somebody must have said to him, Cardadeiro's over there. I don't know what that meant, but anyway. So this fella comes up. Hey, you got to come up here. We need your help. What? I don't know your repertory. I don't know what you guys do. So they dragged me over there, physically dragged me over there. And I don't know if a fellow by the name of Frank Rosa. Frank Rosa was their bass player. And he says he's got a job, but he's got to go to work. He can't stay until the end of the dance. Oh, man, come on. Give me a break. I don't know. It's they're simple. Really? So, okay, they gave me his bass, and off I went. Somewhere else, Almeida was playing there at the time. And I remember, and he looked at me with the strangest look in his face. And, man, he's pretty good. I don't know how that was, but I had a few lessons playing for Lisboa. So I kept the rest of the songs I did know. It was just a question of where are the keys, what keys are in, whatever. And from that on, they asked me, I want you to come to Newark Pavilion next week. We have practices there on Friday nights. And I said, okay, I'll go over there. I'll get more knowledgeable in case they call again. Oh, they called again. I was forever. He says, no, you're part of this group now. So wait a minute. I have responsibilities to Mr. Carlos. I said, no, you just use your best language and tell him goodbye. I can't do that. So, but I did go. It was the hardest thing. Acredita, it was the hardest thing that I ever had to do is to tell a friend, look, I can't use you anymore. And then, you know how he responded to me? Man, I applaud you. Man, I think that's the greatest, because the Iberics was the big thing at the time. I'm glad that they called on you. You're going to do fantastic. You got to go. You got to go. No problem. I can go to the union and get a musician. And that's how it started with the Iberics.
How important were the musical groups to the radio programs and vice versa?
Equal. I think they were about equal. One hand washes the other.
Right.
We needed their publicity as they announced social events throughout California about who's playing for the band, for the dance. Our name would come up, of course, and they would need us because sometimes they can, if their audience wasn't all that much, and they, okay, can you give us a little break on the call? Yeah, we did. And that's one of the things, one of the PRs that came out, where it became known that we're easygoing people. That was the first band, by the way. That was the first band, Iberics. That was the first band that played rock and roll for the Portuguese. And of course, that sold out. Anybody that listened to us, hey, he's playing rock and roll.
How long did the Ibéricos last, do you recall, more or less?
Well, it depends on which one you're talking about. There's three of them.
Right. Well, the original ones. The original ones with Enrique.
I left, let's see, it must have been, my friend, oh gosh, 66, 67, somewhere around there. Yeah, about 3-4 years with me.
Mm-hmm.
About that. But they have been on, but they have been long before I got home from the Navy.
We could talk for a while, and I actually want to have another conversation with you on we're going to be doing a series in the fall during our lecture series, John, on Fado, and I'd like you to participate. We're going to have a panel on Fado, and I'm already extending you the invitation to participate.
And I'm going to extend you an invitation to come up here to Fremont, California, which is not on the street. I have a book over there. I kid you not.
Well, we're going to do it. We're going to do it. We're going to do it. We'd like to have a present. That was our intent, of course, was some of these things that were not with this, but some of the events we're going to have in the fall were just like they've been the prior years, had been, at the university. And of course, we'd love to have you there, but that's going to be impossible this fall. But I'd like you to participate and to talk a little bit more about Fado, so that's why I'm not going to touch on Fado today. So I'd like to end it with a couple of other thoughts from you. And first of all is, so the community is not the same that it was in the 1960s or 70s. We had immigration coming every single week, as you know, from all of Portugal, but mainly the Azores, especially in the 60s and 70s, right up until 1977, 78, when it kind of tapered off, as you know the history as well as I do. And we had continued immigration in the late 70s and early 80s, but very, very little. The bulk of our immigration was 60s and 70s. That community is now older. The people who listened to radio in the 1960s and 70s who were in their 30s and 40s are either very, very old or have passed on, unfortunately. And so how do you see Portuguese radio and the role of Portuguese radio moving forward? What are your thoughts on that?
Not good. Not good at all. And in part is because, as you mentioned, the lack of immigration. There's a lot of people that you mentioned also that are no longer with us. They're gone. The immigration, as I recall it, from those years, and even into probably the 80s, I don't know. I don't keep track. Are dead. They're gone. They're 6 feet under, which is a tragedy to all of us because so much could have been done. There's so much animosity still because of the Azorians and the mainlanders. Even today, I wish they'd get off their little pedestal. We're all human beings. We're all of the same nation, even though they're autonomous. I understand that, but they weren't for a long, long time. Sure. And every time they talk about, the word that comes out of their mouth is Portuguese, not necessarily Azorian.
Sure. Yeah, we're all Portuguese.
They're all Portuguese. And so why is this division? I never understood that. If it's that same garbage that I heard the years prior about the Azorians going to, or the Azorian girls, I should say, what's the guys? Going to Angola and Mozambique and so forth during the war and creating havoc over there with the girls. If it's that, that's nothing. That it may have been something a little more important at the time, not anymore. It's unfortunate. That's human nature.
And so today, as we look at the community becoming more American and less Portuguese, which is natural, it happens with all ethnicities.
Absolutely.
And especially when there's no continued immigration. Is there a role for Portuguese radio?
Well, I can only speak for myself. I would say yes. But I'm broadcasting out of the media, what do you call that? Radio Portugal.
So online radio stations.
Online radio. Yeah, we got 48 countries responding, so I assume there is a future.
So is there, okay, let me ask you that. Does the radio reverse itself? In other words, when you have online radio, that you have listeners and we can have him here on this since we're doing Facebook Live as well. So
Sure.
if you have listeners in different countries who are interested, who are listening to you because you're speaking in Portuguese,
Mhm.
my question to you is this. Now, does radio have another role? In the 1960s and 70s and 80s, radio's role was to bring Portugal to the community and to kind of intertwine the communities amongst themselves. So we knew what was going on in San Jose and vice versa. And so, but also to bring Portugal, the Azores and Madeira and the Portuguese-speaking countries to us. Now, since the technologies are totally different, and since maybe we don't have the listenership, or when I say we, those of you who are doing radios. So the Portuguese radio programs don't have the listenership in California that they once did because people are speaking less Portuguese and more English, and so they're not listening to you like grandpa used to or their parents. Do radio have maybe a reverse role? In other words, is it time that maybe the radio here starts to tell the world what's going on with the Portuguese community in California? Could that be a vehicle and a role for radio, Portuguese radio, to play so that other communities and other folks who live, whether they live in Australia or Belgium, they can know what's going on with us here? Is that a possible role?
It is always possible. I don't know if it's going to be a pragmatic approach to it. I honestly am very cynical about it. I don't see us in 20 years, even what we are today. I don't see that. I wish I did, because I love my country, I love my people, I love the community that I have been a part of all these years. But doggone it, let's be real. There's a lot of them that also don't like us. There's quite a few out there that, oh, the radio think you are. Oh, my goodness. Nothing. I'm nothing. Without you guys, I ain't nothing, as they say back in Alabama.
But do you think that kind of animosity may have been to an older generation? The younger generation looks at it a little bit different.
No doubt. No doubt. I don't know if that's been transmitted to the younger generation either. That I don't know. There's no facts. There's nothing to statistics or anything else to suggest anyway to look at it. I don't know. I'm just cynical. I'm just apprehensive in the sense that I don't think it's going to happen. But the good thing about it, I'm not going to be around.
Well, let's not go there. Well,
let's
John,
not go there.
thank you so much. We're going to wrap it up. We have the Dean on still with us. Thank you, Dean Chapman, for joining us.
Thank you.
Any words of wisdom from you are always very, very welcome. Dean Chapman is our #1 cheerleader for everything that's Portuguese at Fresno State. She's been amazing, and we all appreciate what she does.
Well, you're very sweet, Dinesh. I think what you've done here is just remarkable in such a short period of time, just a little over a year. And John, I so have enjoyed listening to you reminisce, because it's the story of your people and frankly so many other peoples coming to the United States. And when I hear you talk, it reminds me of stories I've heard in my own family, not from Portugal, but from elsewhere. And what I think is so heartening is the retention of traditions through the festas, through the churches, to be honest. A lot of it is centering on faith. And I know for my family from Ireland, that was it. The church was everything. And it was where they gathered, where they met people from other backgrounds, and where they worshiped. It was their whole life. When I meet Portuguese American girls in the Valley, they aspired to be the queen of the festa. I mean, that's like the biggest deal. And when I ran the honors college, the Smithcamp Family Honors College here at Fresno State, when I saw Queen of the Festa as one of the major awards, I would always go, okay, that's a very big deal. And people would say, what are you talking about? It's a beauty pageant. I'd say, no. It is a big deal. You don't get it. This is a whole cultural thing. It's not just she's pretty. It's about who she is and what she does with her church and her family and everything. So that's what makes the Azorean and Portuguese combined culture so rich and heartening. And when we have the gatherings at Fresno State, it's incredible. People come from far and wide. They walk in the dark. They find these places where we have the meetings. Dinesh, I don't think I told you, one night I ran into two ladies and we were all confused where we were going. And here I was, the supposed, host campus person. And I'm like, oh my God, we're walking to the wrong rooms. And they come from far and wide, from Tulare County, Merced County, where the dairy farms are, because it gives people a sense of home to talk and learn about the homeland, to learn about their place here in the United States. And so I really appreciate learning from you too, John, and I hope you do join us in the fall.
Well, I'll do my best to do so. I hope I'm available.
Oh dear. Okay.
Well,
I'm always on the go. I don't know. My wife sometimes wonders about me.
But we're gonna get you down here. We want to have a FADU event on Zoom, and we're gonna make sure you're there.
Listen,
And then when we're opened up, hopefully soon after that, we will. We want to host FADU because we're celebrating the 100th anniversary of Amalia Rodrigues, and so we're going to be doing a few things at the university. And so we're hoping that you'll be part of it. So John, thank you again so much. Thank you, Dean Chapman, for joining us.
Oh, welcome.
Thank you all for being part of this conversation. John, do continue with radio, please.
I do thank you for the invitation. It was a pleasure being here. And I hope that what I said a little while ago about being cynical, I hope it isn't true.
Well,
There's way too much laughter for it to be true.
Well, thank you all very much, and thank you all for joining us. And again, all of these are archived at PBBI and through Fresno State. So thank you, John, and we'll be in touch. Thank you, Dean, and thank you all.
And thank
Take
you.
care. Be well.
Thank you. Be well. Be safe. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.